The Point of View is brought to you by Cowbell Coffee. Cowbell Coffee. Taste it, love it. Kel White Choco. Happy smile.
Welcome to The Point of View. This is your favorite current affairs show on television, here on CCTV. On The Point of View, we pick the right topics, get the right guests, ask them relevant questions on issues that matter to you. We have a big show tonight. GMPC wants a bigger stake in two key oil fields. They've appealed to Parliament to allow them to start talking to Aker Energy. We'll try and understand what is at stake and whether this is the right thing to do. We have a big guest to help us work through the issues. Stay with us.
This morning,
nothing wakes me up better than a cup of Cowbell coffee. Delicious coffee aroma.
How can you forget your lines again?
I'm sorry, sir, just that it tastes really good.
Cowbell coffee.
Enjoy the delicious creamy coffee taste of 3-in-1 Cowbell coffee.
It's a beautiful day.
Waiting.
Cowbell coffee. Taste it, love it.
This advertisement has been vetted and approved by the FDA.
Mama Josie. Fe.
Different era, better result. Time has changed and time has brought Kel Charcoal Toothpaste. Healthy gums, anti-cavity, fresher breath, and it whitens teeth. Kel Charcoal Toothpaste. Sankofa.
Yenchi. Kel Charcoal Toothpaste.
Happy smile.
So, Parliament has been asked to approve the acquisition of significant stakes in the Deepwater Tunnel Cape 3 Points and the South Deepwater Tunnel basins. Now, this memorandum is dated 30th July. It got to Parliament and it got through in record time. There's been many reactions to this. A number of civil society organizations have written to the Speaker of Parliament asking for an investigation of the transaction with Aker. We don't know whether this is essentially water under the bridge, because it appears some of the things they're asking for have already gone through. Bryce Simmons, who's the Vice President of Imani, is my guest. He's also written an article which is very interestingly titled, Ghana Wants to Make Norway Rich by $1 billion. Bryce, welcome to the show. Good evening.
Thank you very much, Bernard. How are you?
Very well. It's good to see you.
Thank you.
Fantastic. What I wanted to do was to quickly walk viewers through some quick chronology. So, the Parliament has been asked to do a number of things. They are being asked to consider and approve acquisition by GMPC, which is our national oil company, through a subsidiary of GMPC called Explorco, a 37% interest in what is called the DWTCTP. This is the Deepwater Tunnel Cape 3 Points. I'll just call it the oil field one, operated by Aker. And also to obtain a 70% stake in the the South Deepwater Tunnel operated by AGM. They are also asking that Parliament considers and approves establishment of a joint operating company between Aker Energy and AGM and GMPC Explorco. They also want Parliament to mandate the Minister of Energy and Finance, the two ministers, to agree on a purchase price with Aker Energy and then AGM. And then they also want a loan not exceeding $1.65 billion to finance the acquisition at a price to be negotiated. This is key, but which will not exceed $1.3 billion. And then also a capex to develop the first phase amounting to $350 million. Now, they give some quick background, which I'll not go to, but essentially they're saying that commercial production in Ghana has seen a decline, and there appears to be a shift away from fossil fuels to what is called renewables. And major oil companies are responding to this push by pressure from their government and stakeholders to move away into non-fossils. So Shell is exiting exploration. Earlier on, we heard of ExxonMobil in June 2021, who are also exiting Ghana. And other Total and ENI are all planning diversity activities. Now, according to the GMPC, this would leave Ghana with unexplored and underdeveloped oil resources, and that they either have to develop and explore this on their own or build their own operator capacity, as Brazil, Indonesia, and Malaysia have done. There are other related problems I'm not going to, but basically they are proposing to partner with Aker and AGM to jointly develop the two blocks. Now, they're basically saying the two companies, Aker and AGM, have a wealth of deep water experience and requisite technology, and they are keen to enter this arrangement with GNPC. And basically saying that there are existing discoveries already. There's the Pecan and the Nyankrom fields. I'll show you the map shortly. These are by far the largest discoveries in Ghana, and the only ones that can be developed as standalone operations. Now, in relation to the transaction, GMPC will acquire 37% direct and indirect stake in the first block from Aker Energy and 70% interest in the second block from AGM, using its wholly subsidized, only owned subsidiary called Explorco. Now, GMPC already has what is called carried interest in these blocks, but what they're basically suggesting is that Explorco will have commercial interest, so they have to contribute money to the development of the block, which is why they're asking for $350 million. And they're also saying that the up to $1.3 billion will be the maximum price they will pay for the shares or the control as they're asking for. They also deal with valuation issues in their petition or their letter to Parliament, basically saying that the two sides had disagreements over the value of the amount they want. So they got an independent British advisory firm called Lambert Energy, who then valued in a range which the two parties agreed on. So essentially, they are asking for a total loan amount not exceeding $1.6 billion, and they are saying it's a worst-case scenario. They're basically saying that the value of the amount of stake they're asking for should not exceed $1.3 billion, and they want $350 million as their contribution to the development. And according to the GMPC, there are about 10 different benefits for Ghana, including getting to build operator capacity at a critical time in our history, ensuring that Ghana's crude oil will increase by 140,000 to 200,000, and a whole lot of things. Now, civil society organizations are not happy with this arrangement. They say Parliament should investigate because they think that they don't agree with the valuation, and there are a few other things. They felt that Aker itself was on its way out, and that for Aker, who have acquired a stake from Hess, they acquired a block from Hess at $100 million. How can you be selling it to us in excess of $1 billion? I mean, what have they done since 2018 to 2020 for the value to increase from 100 million to 1.3 billion in essence? So that's one of the questions. So they issued a 6-page statement asking Parliament to look into the matter. But that's not all. Bright Simmons and Imani have written a bigger one. They're basically saying that if you look at the history of this transaction, Ghana is going to make Norway richer by $1 billion. And they're basically saying we need to evaluate the history of this agreement or this whole relationship with Aker to get a sense of why this is a scandalous deal. I wanted to show you the map of the oil field so you can have a sense of what we're talking about. So then we'll talk to Bright. So this is essentially in the southwestern part of Ghana, and there are 3 rings there. Anything labeled green is a field which has been discovered, right? So there are ovals. The small oval in the middle is phase 1, which has Pecan. Then there's a larger oval on top, which is the area for phase 2 of Pecan. And these are all parts of the first block owned by Aker. And then the second one is the one they call Nyakrom or Nyankrom, which is at the bottom there. So the orange or the yellowish parts are further possible resources, but they've not been developed yet. Now, there's exploration, there's discovery, appraisal, and then there's production. So these are the levels. Bright, thank you for joining us. So I just hope I've given a quick overview of the situation. So you've tackled this from 2 points. Imani and the other CSOs don't like this. They think they have no problem with Ghanaians owning part of an oil block. But they feel that this is not really the way to go about it. But beyond that, you've gone ahead to say that it's not just the fact that the valuation and things are questionable. The history of this suggests that we deliberately reduced our stake in the oil blocks, and then we are coming to get money from the Ghanaian to reacquire the blocks. So it's a scam. Essentially, that's what you're saying.
In a way, yes.
So let's start with the historical issues first. You're saying that we are going to make Norway $1 billion rich. Essentially saying that the principles in this agreement, Aker, never went away. Can you explain that briefly to us?
So, first of all, obviously, you need to understand what Aker is. It's one of these oil juniors almost getting to mid-cap. So it's not like a Shell or an Exxon, and mostly owned by a family, a gentleman called Gel Ingrok. And he and his wife has a company called TRG that owns about 2/3 of Aker, ASA. So Aker then got into Ghana sometime in 2008. And that time they created a joint venture, which is typical because you're going to a particular terrain, you don't want to overexpose yourself to liability, so you usually create an SPV in some fashion. And then this was called Aker Energy, and that acquired some interest in a block in Ghana, which is the smaller block that we've been talking about. So it's very easy to get confused about which block we're talking about, and a lot of the confusion arises because people mix up the two blocks. They got an interest in the block that is the smaller one, the one that was at the bottom that you were pointing at. And then when the government changed, that got terminated. Now, when that got terminated, they entered into negotiations with the government over a long period of time, and eventually the government agreed that they were going to pay them for the data they had collected on that field. So they paid them almost $30 million, about $29 million, essentially go away money. So they leave, and then the government tries, because don't forget that because of the dispute, the block was encumbered for a while. So when they gave them the money from 2012 onwards, the government had this view that we needed to accelerate this desire for Ghana to be able to operate its own assets. And here is where the confusions then begin to arise. So there is general concern that often we don't own enough of our resources.
Yeah.
So that's one issue. That's resource ownership. There's also the concern that we often don't operate the resources. So we just sit there and we are told things, and we accept those things at face value. And we've been on a journey trying to change that for a very long time, to be more involved in operations. And in the oil sector, they call that operatorship. So essentially, the simplest way of thinking of it is like you manage the production of the oil. So you make decisions around who to hire to do drilling, services contracts that are related to all manner of things. You also make technical calls. So if, for instance, a geophysics group makes the argument that we think is the right technical concept, another group has a certain view, and you have to find a compromise. Eventually, the operator has to make the call. Do this type of directional drilling or drill.
So in the past, we've just owned a bit and not operated actively.
We've not been on it.
And the GMPC stake has been what is called a carried interest. So they are like a passive partner. When the drilling starts, they have a share, but they don't actually take active part in the exploration.
So they have a right to a participating interest.
Yes.
Which means that they pay part of the cost of production.
Yes.
The carried interest means they don't pay anything at all.
Yes.
They just get the
So
return.
GMPC's ownership of 10 or 15% has been in the carried interest fashion.
And then they have the right to back in
if they want
and
to
get additional participation.
Great. So that issue has always been there.
All of that leads to ownership.
I get it.
But beyond ownership, which we've always wanted to get more, beyond ownership, there's also the issue of control.
Good.
Who gives the contracts out? Who determines the technical decisions? So when we decided, for instance, to use a convertible, shape, more or less, to create the FPSO, that's a decision an operator will take. Somebody will decide that let's lease the the FPSO, that's the big shape in which the oil is going into, as opposed to buy it outright. Somebody will say, let's buy a second hand. All those decisions typically are in the power of the operator.
Good.
Though, if you have some stake in there will often be committees. In Ghana, we call them the joint management committees, where decisions are taken. But who is in the driver's seat is the operator.
Good.
Now, the confusion is that often in the discussions, we mix the two up.
Good.
So the issue around ownership and Ghana wanting more ownership is not the same as Ghana wanting to be an operator.
Good.
You could have 90% and still bring in an operator. In the beginning, in Saudi Arabia, when they renegotiated a lot of the contracts on the fines, they boosted their equity, but they still maintained foreign operatorship. until they got more and more comfortable, built more technology and capacity.
Good.
So let's not confuse the two. But in general, there is a pursuit for both. Get more ownership and at the same time start to operate.
Fair enough.
So what happened is that in 2012, we went on a roadshow trying to get joint venture partners who were willing to come in and partner with us.
So you can become an operator.
Over time.
Good.
And from that time onwards, and even a little before, every time we sign an agreement, we put in a clause saying that, in 15 years, we intend to be an operator. So giving you an indication of where we're going. In that process, we discovered that there was a group called AGM that was made up of AGR and Minexco and a couple of other people. Basically, some entity that had been set up in Gibraltar that wanted to come in and take this block and was willing to let us be the majority partner. So we're going to get like 79% and they were going to get 21%. In the course of time, it became quite clear that we were going to be a joint operator. In fact, we wanted to be the operators and these people will be technical contractors supporting that effort. In time, much of this did not materialize, and we saw that our rights in that block got whittled down till the big controversy last 2 years that you saw with the Imani and other CSOs going head on when the government wanted to revise that agreement and bring it even further down. Ultimately, Ghana's stake in that block came as low as 15%. And now, all of a sudden, and the reason why I remember that stake went down was because the investor, this case AGM, which had been bought by Aker, so it's a long history, but somehow they eventually now control it through TRG, not
this
Aker.
Same Aker that had been kicked out.
Actually, not Aker, but the owner of the two-thirds owner of Aker called Injrock. He had somehow found, I'm not going to bore your viewers, but he had somehow found a way to be back in charge. So essentially, he was kicked out when the government changed through a very interesting, series of transactions. He was finally in charge of that block in his personal capacity through his holding company. Now, the reason why they said we needed to lower our stake to 15%. Remember, we have started out from like 79% in the very beginning, all the way down 15% over time. All the time that we've been asked to revise our stake downwards, it's been because that was the way to make the field attractive for investment, right? Then all of a sudden we decide that, rather than Aker, who had got all these concessions, actually going to find the money and come and do it, actually we should find the money and let them do it. We should find the bulk of the money.
Which is where we are now.
We want to now increase our stake back to 70%. Now, the question that everybody is asking is threefold. First is, Aker all along has said we're looking for the money. And it's only because of coronavirus or COVID-19 that they've slowed down. But there's never been a sense that they did not stand by their earlier claims that they needed all of these concessions in order to raise the money. Now they get all these concessions, and suddenly we have to pay to reinstate our rights, more or less. Because remember that in the way that we've structured our petroleum regime, the back-in rights that we have, if they are maintained in the agreement, and the time comes for us to pay our share, because the usual reason why we don't want too much of the stake is two. One is that investors will not come in. And the second is that even if they come in when the time comes for us to pay our share, because when you have the stake, you have to now pay for development and production. We often don't have the money, right? Now, if all of a sudden, because of that reason, we've given concessions, when our petroleum regime will have meant that if we had kept those rights, we have the right to ask the partner to pay for our participating interest, and then when production commences, they recover.
Yes, that's the way it's done typically.
We have that right? So it means, therefore, that we could have, when it comes to ownership, I'm going to go to operatorship in a very separate discussion. When it comes to ownership, we've given up ownership, and then suddenly discovered that we need ownership. And therefore, we are now willing to pay for the rights that we already sacrificed on our own free will just 2 years ago. It makes absolutely no sense. So the argument we are making is that there's something fishy there they need to explain to us.
The explanation they are giving that because generally oil companies are exiting fossil fuels. They give ExxonMobil and they give other examples, ENI and co. Essentially wanting to reduce the fossil fuel aspect of their work and going to renewables. For which reason, if we did not get ownership, we'll be left with essentially
stranded assets, as they call them.
You don't buy that argument.
It doesn't make any sense because that is not something that has just suddenly dawned on us since 2019. Bernard, you are a very well-informed person. This energy transition conversations about fossil fuels not being the future have been going on for a decade. I mean, all of us read the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports. companies have been making these transitions for these decisions to exit some assets that are not core in their portfolio for many years. But that is not even the more critical point. The more critical point is this: the analysis about the energy transition does not suggest, therefore, that investment is lacking. It suggests that investment from OECD-based asset managers may be lacking. It does not mean that Petrobras, Sinopec, etc., and the rest are going to follow the same trend as the OECD. So it's not a given that if ExxonMobil exits and you have a truly viable field or truly viable asset, Adas Petroleum, which is a Chinese-run entity, will not come. The issue about the energy transition is a complete red herring. And it would definitely not have been something that was changed in 2019 and 2020, during which period they were continuing to assure us that Aker intended to run this. But more importantly, are they saying that Aker is backing out completely because of the energy transition? So where is the argument? If you were saying that Aker wants to back out because its shareholders have told them to divest of the assets and move into green assets, that would make sense. But to make some random rambling statement about what ExxonMobil and Shell is doing, when we have a specific issue we are discussing, Aker's commitments, including issuing contracts to FPSO contractors like Yanson in Malaysia and the rest, and then backing out, etc., does not address the issues at stake. An energy transition conversation is not what we are having. Someone came to our country, committed to spend money, based on the willingness to spend money, acquired concessions from us. Then now it's asking us to pay to more or less back in. That's a problem.
So you are even dealing with the fundamental. We are not even talking even about the amount that group paid Hess and the amount they are valuing.
So that's a different transaction.
Yes.
The transaction in respect of DWT, Deepwater Tunnel, K3 points, is the one that concession is what Hess used to have.
Yes.
So that's different from what we are discussing with the AGM block.
But it's together, right?
It's together anyway.
The AGM is the second block, the one at the bottom.
Exactly.
But I want you to put everything together because you don't have the whole day. What I just want to understand from you, you're saying, number one, the point about oil transition being the reason for us wanting more ownership of the second block doesn't make sense to you.
No.
Number two, there are feels that the valuation, even if we wanted to get ownership, the amount we are paying for it, if you look at the amount that Aker paid for the block, it looks exorbitant. You want to tackle that?
Yes. Besides that, if you decide that let's not confuse things. Let's not confuse resource ownership arguments with operator arguments, because they are both very important, and we'll come to them separately. In respect of resource ownership, if the issue is that we are afraid that because of this energy transition, these guys will leave, and then we'll have the assets and no means to operate them, so we need to start buying them now. First of all, the issue about buying them presupposes that those are the only assets that we have, and they've made that argument also that when we look at the current portfolio in Ghana, this is the only sensible one. It's not true. So that's also an important point. Cosmos has this Wawa and Akasa discoveries that are still not commercialized since 2011, and that has nothing to do with energy transition, right? We have this offshore expanded shallow water tunnel field that Erin Energy is supposed to be running, which is also a discovery. And we heard they had gone bankrupt. GNPC can't find them. That is also there. We have a number of other opportunities in the basin that if GMPC, all they wanted was more resource ownership, they can go and negotiate and discuss and talk about. So this notion that somehow, and remember, when it comes to Wawa and Akasa, they actually have more contingent resources than the Nyankom, the smaller of the two blocks. So that's the smaller of the two blocks. The issues regarding the smaller of the two blocks is actually a more damning set of conversations we have to have. But the point is that if it's just about having ownership, we have a number of other
ownership
assets.
of viable assets. That's why they are saying that this one, for the one on top, there's a pecan which has some proven wells.
Yes, but they are buying Nyankom as well. And Nyankom is valued for the core valuation that their advisor has given for Nyankom is $500 million. That's core. They are thinking it's almost $700 million. And they want to buy 70% of that. Even if they say they are getting some kind of a street deal and they are going to spend something in the region of $400 million on it, that's a lot of money, right? Now, the argument is we have other fields in the region, in our own basin, that are more prolific than this very one.
This Nyankom one.
Than this Nyankom one. Then when it comes to Pecan, which indeed is an interesting play, when it comes to Pecan and the rest, the issue about valuation, even if you want it, even if you think it's going to become distressed and stranded, even if you want it, the valuation still matters. So that's the second argument. The third argument, which is also just quite interesting, is that you, GMPC, and then we go into the operator arguments. You, GMPC, that says that you are interested in operatorship. You've been trying to be an operator for God knows when. We have instances in which you have gone in, like the ones that I mentioned, in the very beginning with this AGM block, the smaller of the two oil blocks.
They've not been very successful.
No, they went in, said they wanted to be an operator. Then, over time, instead of the discipline and the focus to make sure you're making the right investments in technical capacity, what is an operator? An operator is basically a pilot, right? You don't have to own the plane to be a great pilot, right? But instead of focusing on training and all of those things that will make you a great pilot, you are busy discussing buying planes and forgetting for the fact that you already had the opportunity to be a pilot and already had a plane when this whole South Deepwater Tunnel matters started. You had operator status. You had the means to raise money because in the period, in the intervening period, you've been spending money all over the place. You own assets in a distressed gold mine, Sankofa Pristia, which nobody understands. They continue to own assets like Salt Pond offshore, where analysts have told them are actually an environmental hazard and need to decommission. They refuse to decommission. They had a stake in Airtel, when at that point was a very risky investment. They've made all manner of investments, and they continue to give guarantees. 2018 and 2019 alone, they gave $1 billion in guarantees to state-owned firms. They are owed almost $200 million by a whole manner of state-owned entities. So you've had all these opportunities to organize properly.
GMPC has not even focused on developing its operatorship capacity in the past few years.
Yes, because they are operators. It's when they say we want to be an operator, then they confuse people because most people are not aware that they are already an operator. You get my point? So they are an operator in some fields.
We'll come back and deal with that point. This is the point of view. We are trying to understand some arguments against the proposed arrangement between GMPC and Aker Energy. Parliament has already given the go-ahead for a discussion to proceed, which go-ahead civil society organizations think needs to be looked at again. We'll deal with those when we come back. Stay with us.
Hello there. We know what matters today, don't we? Hurry up. Follow safety measures. Drive for hours. Grab a perfect spot. Park smoothly. And then visit another shop and scroll for the opportunities. Tap to pay. Enjoy that extra reward. Get 10% extra cashback when you pay with Visa. How you pay.
From weekend warrior to workhorse, when you get behind the wheel of the new MG ZS. The luxurious sedan experience meets the rugged frontier spirit of the SUV. Indulgently generous interiors, hill start assist system for unwanted uphill traffic, and the touchscreen infotainment system with Apple CarPlay for easy mobile phone. Designed for the driven.
Good Day Energy Drink keeps you going. Available in major supermarkets and shops near you. Excessive drinking can be detrimental to your health. Not recommended for persons under 18 years, lactating mothers, pregnant women, and people sensitive to caffeine. This advert is FDA approved.
Welcome back to the point of view. Tonight we are trying to examine the merits of Parliament allowing GMPC to go ahead to negotiate with Aker for 37% interest in an oil block operated by Aker Energy and a 70% stake in another one operated by AGM. They also want to set up a joint operating company and mandate the Ministries of Energy and Finance to agree on a purchase price. Now, initially they have said that the price for the blocks we're getting should not exceed 1.3 billion. Parliament says, well, you can negotiate, but the maximum is 1.1 billion. They also get another 350 million to develop an oil field, which is really unproven, if you ask. Bryce Simmons and CSOs are saying this is not the right way to go. Bryce Simmons is already trying to prove that, look, GMPC has been dithering. Initially, they wanted to own shares, and then they said they didn't want to own. They've not been very consistent, and their track record of operations is also not very good. So Parliament should not have even given them the right to start talking to Aker. So looking at the timelines, this memorandum is 30th July. Today is 9th August. It all seemed very quick in terms of what has gone through. What were you expecting Parliament to say or do when they saw this memorandum?
So you've got 2 blocks there, right? One of them, we used to own almost 80%. Think of it like we used to have, if it was $100 million asset, we had $80 million of it. Somehow, the same Parliament has acquiesced, and now we own 15%. Somebody then comes back to you and say, we want to take it back up to 70%, and for that, we need to pay almost $400 million. I'm trying to break them apart so it's easier. But we want to pay out something like $400 to $500 million for this asset. The most basic question is, what is it that has changed since you last changed your mind?
They will say when we took the block, we invested in drilling a couple of wells, and so the amount of oil we think is there is more. So we spent some more money on this, and the field is more lucrative. So if you want to buy what you sold to us at 100, you need to pay for how much I spent on developing those wells, and the fact that now I have proven that this has more oil, so you need to pay a bit more for it.
Good.
That's the basic.
Except that we have the data, right, and it's not correct. The $259 million they were supposed to spend, which was part of the requirements, they did not spend, right? We generally have a state of lawlessness in the Ghanaian oil basin. We have companies that don't pay surface rents. GRE can't find them. I put some of them, Oranto and others, in my document. We have companies that declare bankruptcy, refuse to even bother to notify the regulator. We have companies that have not done any drilling, even though they've signed contracts that require that they do drilling for several years. Nobody's enforcing any law in our oil basin anyway. So the truth of the matter is that when they took over, the required investment that they were supposed to make in AGM, they have not fully made. More critically, when they then finally drilled those wells, they drilled 2 wells that we know of. Even though some analysts claim it's 3 wells, we know of 2 wells. We know of Yankom and Chenchen. Chenchen was trying to parallel what they did with Peach in the bigger well, DWT-CTP.
The one on top.
So they wanted to hit another end to see the extent.
Put up the map again so it will help Mike.
So if you look at the block where we have the Pecan field, you see that they did a hit, a somewhat more adjoining find.
There you have it, yes.
And so now, because of that, we have Peach, which gives an idea of the spread of that find. When you come down below, you see that they try to hit another similar parallel approach with Chenchen. And then Chenchen was so disappointing, they just stopped reporting about it. And they claimed we were doing quantification and the rest of it. The truth of the matter is that was a disappointment. So we know enough about that second block, this one at the bottom, to know that it's a potential trouble. Right? No wonder that's the one they want to give us 70% of.
Irrespective of the green patch in Yankom.
Yes, that's the point I'm making. So Yankom is just one well.
Yes.
Now, they think Yankom has about 60 million barrels, right? But in order for you to be able to get enough for this to be a standalone concept or even to tie it into this other bigger field profitably, you need better information. And I'm saying that the other wildcat that was drilled was not very successful. So we're already beginning to worry about the valuation of this field.
Fair enough.
And so the point I'm making is if you then make a determination around the pricing, and then you look at the advisories that we were given, one of them being the Lambert advisory piece, and you look at the Lambert advisory piece closely and you see that, they themselves have told you that generically, if a field has not been appraised, we will risk it by 25%, by which they mean they will discount it by 75%. So they will say, even though you estimate 100 barrels are there, we will think it's 25 barrels because you've not done the appraisal. But when you look at how they actually did the valuation for this, they use a 65% risking. You understand my point? If you apply the unappraised and therefore lower the estimation, you cut the valuation by almost a third. If you cut the valuation by almost a third, you're not going to pay more than $150 million for that asset. If you're going to pay $150 million or less, and you are willing to pay almost $400 million, somebody should shoot you. It's as simple as that. So if you're in Parliament and you look at those numbers and you have the data that's available to you and say, no, I will spend 2 hours evaluating the matter. After it's been referred to you on Monday, you go there on Tuesday, you spend 2 hours, and then you give them the mandate, saying that, oh, don't worry too much. At the end of the day, when they go and bring the agreements, then we'll look at it. That doesn't make sense. But it doesn't make sense because they now have the mandate.
But Lambert will say that for us, we had documents applied by the two sides. Don't forget, GMPC and Aker had separate valuations, which are far apart. So they submitted their documents to Lambert, and Lambert said, based on the information I have, this is the valuation I'm giving.
GMPC said
so
that.
I'm saying that Lambert did not audit. Okay. For example,
GMPC said that we should only value the core assets, the one that we have a fair idea of in terms of the value, in terms of the amount of oil that's there.
Yes.
Don't add the prospects.
Which makes sense.
And then the seller says, no, we think the prospects are great, add them. That's natural, right? So they go and bring somebody. But then before they do, GMP is already capitulating. So when they bring this other person, this person does not really have a mandate to make a decision. He just makes a mandate based on giving the data and what the operators have already agreed. What do I do?
As an arbiter.
Good. And then eventually GMPC say, now we think they should add the prospects and all of that and inflate the value. Now, what that tells me is that GMPC, Aker, and any other private sector players in that space are now on one side. The government on Ghana and you and I are on another side. That's fine. It's a normal principal agent problem. To think of GMPC as the state of Ghana or the people of Ghana or serving the public interest is where you get yourself into trouble.
So you're saying that we should consider GMPC and Aker as being on the same side?
Exactly. For some reason, they believe in inflating the value of the pie.
You think GMPC is not serving the Ghanaian interest in this transaction?
They are serving their commercial interest. And that commercial interest...
But they are owned by the government and the people of Ghana.
Yes, that's why I made the point about principal agent, right? You own, but you don't know enough of it. You think you control GMPC, but you don't know enough of it. So GMPC will do what they want.
So we own, but we don't control.
Good.
And GMPC is not acting in our interest.
No. I think GMPC
is acting in their commercial interest.
Yes, and what is that commercial interest? You've got boards of directors, you've got management. If the value of the field is large and the participating interest consequently also means you need to raise large amount of money based on how much you think the plan of development will cost and all of that. The bigger the asset, the more money to spend. It's as simple as that. Now, the more money to spend, the more contracts you give, the more you have strategic flexibility and the rest of it.
Not necessarily the more Ghana will gain?
Not necessarily, because there are producers in this country who operate at a loss, right? And in some instances, investors get shafted.
So you're saying it's possible for GNPC commercially to enter a bad deal, but still their directors and the principals could be doing well.
Particularly when the principal is not one that can go bankrupt easily. If it's the state of Ghana. And the state of Ghana goes and borrow a lot of money for GMPC. Now GMPC now, because they've paid a lot of this money to Aker, have the right to make decisions around operatorship. So basically, who to give who contract. Let's keep it very simple. Yes, if they don't do it well, they will lose money. True. But the question is, in the case of GMPs, what does losing money mean? This is a company that state entities owe them almost $200 million. They have not paid. You can't do anything. This is a company that is forced or has been forced 2018, 2019 to give almost $1 billion in guarantee to state-owned entities in matters that has nothing whatsoever to do with this mandate. So this is not a company that if it was making losses, it gives a case that much about. And so the argument I'm making is that we should be careful in not assuming that the interests of GNPC, which are commercial interests, necessarily comply, particularly when those commercial interests may be commercial interests of management and board. I'm particularly interested in auditing of GNPC's contracting activity. We know that where they've had money to spend, they go into strange corporate social responsibility things where they don't have a CSR policy that is public. Nobody knows how you apply to get CSR funding from GNPC. They've never held any sessions to convince people that, actually we have a transparent, organized, methodical approach through which you can approach us. Somehow they find a way to give money out, right, through CSR, so-called CSR. Somehow they find the money to guarantee certain investment, which costs them billions of dollars. Now my argument is, in the same way that they make those things without proper recourse to good governance, if they get a lot of money, they will spend it in ways that will not necessarily accrue to our interest.
And you're saying the government of Ghana doesn't know this or doesn't have the will to stop this?
I'm saying
because you're saying we, the people in the government, should see ourselves on one side,
yes,
and GMPC and Aker on another side.
Well, that is why...
That's what you're saying.
Okay, so that's why a decade ago, if this was happening about a decade ago, usually you will formulate the broad contours of the policy. GMPC wants to do this and want to do this, and you throw it out there in the media. Then in the process of it, there will be a lot of consultations with CSOs, with media, and the rest of it. And somehow, all of us will get a sense that the argument is founded on the merits. You get my point? Now, we have a situation where increasingly, they do these things in back room. They then announce it, hope that the CSOs will make some noise and go away, right? What does that tell you? Does it give you an indication that these are people that are interested in the public interest? My argument is that they are serving their own interests. Whatever those interests are, we cannot over-speculate. I know for sure that they are very interested in being the operator seat because it gives them the right to make more contracts. And there's nothing wrong with that. You can use contracts to very effectively...
The argument is that strategically, being an operator not only secures the asset, but also then gives us a capacity to become... To essentially not to lose our oil fields.
And that is where the confusion has arisen, because being an operator is something that the Petroleum Commission and the minister agrees, and you're an operator. You don't necessarily have to have the biggest interest. GMPC is an operator in
some fields already.
Offshore southwestern, right? Through GOSCO. GMPC has a joint ventureship with Technip that it's heavily underinvesting in order to build more technical capacity. GNPC is doing a whole bunch of things, right? And in some respects, already an operator. The question is it a good and effective operator? Has it been a good steward of the resources, or our resources that is putting into this dream to be an operator? And we are saying that it has not shown that effective stewardship. Now it comes back to and say, I want more money because I want to be an operator. When you've been talking about being an operator for years, in all various contracts that you've signed, you've told people that in 15 years I'll be the operator and take over. Okay. You are already a statutory partner of everybody operating in this field. And there's lawlessness going on. You've never complained. In all of these is that there's no credible evidence, piece of evidence, no, none at all, that GMPC is committed to good governance. That's our key argument.
So you are still making very big arguments about the strategy and things. But in terms of this specific transaction, what questions should Parliament have asked? For example, the oil price that was used in the valuation and
those kind of specific
discounted
issues.
cash flows. We need to deal with those issues as well.
So when you look at the is it 10-page report from Parliament with 7 points, I think 1,200 words or something like that. There's no interest whatsoever to look into anything seriously. It's very obvious. They just adopt the minister's argument. And they, from what we are told, they spend 2 hours on it. This is such a big transaction. My argument is when you give them a mandate that they can go and raise money and spend up to $1.1 billion, you're already giving them a mandate. If they bring the agreement back to you, you can only question the terms of the agreement. But the overall policy, whether they should do this at all, should have been examined. Then we go to issues around valuation. The $1.1 billion they approved, this $1.1 billion ceiling. We oppose that ceiling because we think with less money they can still get assets. In the case of Nyankopɔn, it's blatant. It's blatant because it's not being appraised. Appraisal is due for next year.
The one in the bottom.
Yes, appraisal is due for next year. So essentially, we haven't done all the studies that gives an idea of how much oil is really there. The one well we've drilled and the spudding that happened gives us a fairly good idea that at least 60 million barrels we will get, right? But we are justifying this investment around with a notion that it has about almost 200 million barrels, etc., giving that point. So if you risk it properly, if you use a risk-adjusted framework to analyze it, you will not pay more than $150 million thereabout for this AGM block. That's the argument.
What about the one on top?
Good. The one on top, we accept that it's an interesting field. We think that there's probably a reason for GNPC to back in. We think that they probably are on the right path when they argue that it's one of the likely fields to start producing in 4 years, by 2024. The question is, should you pay that amount of, if we now look at where they are going to go, they could spend as much as $770 million on this. Should you pay that amount? We think no. We think no because, right, you pointed out that Aker paid $100 million for it. And Aker maintains it at a book value of $107 million. Exchange rate issues. Don't worry about that. If Hess, who did most of the key discoveries, remember, it's not Aker that did most of the key discoveries. Pecan and the rest were discovered by Hess. If Hess, at the end of having done those discoveries, felt the thing was worth $100 million and gave it to Aker, and then Aker subsequently spent about $260 million on it. And then when Aker had to now invest big amounts of money, $4.4 billion in the initial estimation, now they think they can do $2.5 billion and cut how much they produce. Then after going around and coming back asking for changes to our laws, we giving them all of those things, then they finally say that no, we have postponed it indefinitely. What is it that makes you believe that the upside, apart from the cost, so you take $100 million, you have $260 million, that's about $370 million. What is it that convinces you that between that, there's goodwill of about $500 million on top of that, which you need to pay? Where is the source of that goodwill? Because we have an idea of the book value of the assets, right? My argument is that if Aker, the private sector entity, better attuned to risks in the market, has all the data in there, and is not willing to produce at a higher exposure, why is the government of Ghana of the view that it should increase its backing, it should back in at a higher rate, but on top of that, pay that much goodwill? More critically, when they went to Parliament, they said they spent, this block has, absorbed over $800 million. It is not clear to us how those amounts came about, because when you look at the Aker annual reports, it does not tally. When you look at reporting and filings by TRG, it does not tally. So we have a big problem with the second field, where we think that they should wait till it actually starts producing, because there's huge technical risk involved. Secondly, for the bigger block, which we agree is prolific and is potentially going to be a major contributor to our portfolio down the line, we think that they need to cut down the amount of spending. That means that though Parliament has given them a $1.1 billion ceiling, and Parliament shouldn't have done that, and that was really reckless and feckless of Parliament, we are now appealing to the GMPC to spend far less.
We'll take a break and come back and deal with that. Don't forget there's also a capex request of $350 million, which will then be used as part of some exploration activities for development of the field. We'll talk about that when we come back, because we're told that the other two companies will also contribute more. So it's not only Ghana's risk involved in that development stage. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Whatever the occasion, with ATL, you can never be out of style. ATL, bringing fabric to life.
Bonsoir, monsieur. Madame. Et voilà.
Babe, what is this?
This is the escargot. The foie gras. Oui.
Where did she go?
You pa one casa who say obase or pay fiedian. Eh?
It's been long since you ever felt like this.
Welcome to the best in Ghanaian entertainment on Akwaba Magic. Efie. Welcome home to Akwaba Magic on DSTV channel 150. It's your moment. DSTV.
Good Day Energy Drink keeps you going. Available in major supermarkets and shops near you. Excessive drinking can be detrimental to your health. Not recommended for persons under 18 years, lactating mothers, pregnant women, and people sensitive to caffeine. This advert is FDA approved.
Welcome back to The Point of View. We are still trying to understand where we are with this request by GMPC for Parliament to allow it to engage Aker to acquire stake in two key oil fields. They are looking for up to 1.3 billion. Parliament says 1.1 billion to acquire those stakes. But they also want 350 million to develop the rest of the fields. You think that's also wrong?
Well, no, not necessarily that 350 million is wrong. Mm-hmm. But I think the argument that has been made is that when Aker takes this money, it's not as if the billionaire is going to pocket it and go away. He intends to recommit.
They said they'll commit 750 million.
Mm-hmm.
So we are bringing 350 million.
Mm-hmm.
They will bring 750 million.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third company will bring another 320 million or something.
Well, the only way that makes sense is if you take into account the multi-phase development process, approach that they've proposed. Because there's no way in which if you own 37% in an asset and they claim the cost is $2.5 billion for phase one,
mm-hmm.
you are going to pay less than $800 million.
Mm-hmm.
It's just basic mathematics, because
mm-hmm.
that's what you own.
Mm-hmm.
If you are paying $350 million because they are facing the development,
yes, that's what
so they decided that they are going to lease the FPSO instead of buy it, for
mm-hmm.
instance. They've decided that instead of some of the tie-ins that they were going to do with some of the marginal finds,
mm-hmm.
they are not going to touch those marginal finds. They are going to focus on core delivery, core assets, and then later on do the tiebacks. It doesn't change anything, it just postpones the expenditure. So if because of the fact that GMPC, rather than spending $800 million, which will have been his full share, is saying that because we are spending $350 million and Aker is spending more, Aker may be spending some front loading. For instance, their PSO is $1.2 billion, right? If you decide to lease it, you pay less. But you still have to make some significant down payment for them to build the actual damn thing, right? Now, in order to make that down payment, Aker may decide to make those investments in the rest of it. But that doesn't mean that over the life of the assets, GMPC will still not have to back up and pay for the rights that it has acquired. It will have to pay it somehow. So the fact that we need just $350 million to get to fair soil is not completely explanatory of these variables. The other thing, though, is that it's possible that some of those loose accounting issues may affect the ability to actually deliver on the project. If you set up a joint operatorship entity, so there's now an SPV that you both own. So right now, the way it works is that they individually have direct exposure to the license. Now, what they are suggesting is that they will create a joint operating entity like an SPV. They will own the SPV, and then the license will be transferred to that SPV. So it's like a corporate entity. In a lot of ways, that is not the quickest way for Aker to just get out easily. Because once it doesn't have to deal with its license obligations directly, and it's coming through that organization in which it now is the minority shareholder, it has the scope, especially when doing shared operatorship, to minimize its risk over time. Also, we have a lot of evidence that commercial discoveries have been made and they have not been produced. I was talking about Cosmos since 2011, making some discoveries, and they are not yet ready and things like that. And we also know that we are a very tolerant regime in some respects. If Aker decides that they're going to keep postponing first oil, there's not much we can do, right? GMPC's ability to spend $350 million and Aker spending more in the beginning does not necessarily mean that the field is not overvalued. It being overvalued, it means it's overvalued. It's as simple as that. How the production cost then gets shared is muddying the waters. It has got nothing to do with this. Secondly, if you give money to to Aker, so they farm out, and then having farmed out, they now have a lot of money on their hands, and instead of borrowing, they can now invest back in the asset. It doesn't mean therefore they have not had a windfall. They've still had a windfall, because otherwise they will have borrowed and then been liable for the interest and for the principal. Now they're using money you give to them to reinvest back in the field and still make their returns back. So I'm not sure how that changes any of the dynamic. But they keep trying to explain that, well, it's not just a windfall for Inji Rock. The money that is going to go to them, they're going to put a lot of it back in.
Is there anything Parliament can do at this stage?
Well, three things. One is that if the agreements come back and they've spent that $1.1 billion, my view is that those members who have a conscience, even though they've already given them the mandate, should revisit some of the issues in the substantive agreements, for sure. But I think at this stage, a lot of the responsibility and the burden lies on the government, the executive, to take into account all the criticisms, respond effectively to them, and then assure us if they don't have compelling reasons why they have to spend all this money, that they will not spend all this money. It's as simple as that. We are repeating our request.
Does it matter that it's a loan that GMPC said they will pay back at commercial terms?
Yes, but the reason why it matters is very simple. If GMPC defaults, the government is the one that's doing the actual borrowing. If GMPC does not get its first oil in 2024, it means that there's no oil for them to securitize and pay. So a commitment to securitize oil is essentially misdirecting the risk. Because all they are saying is that if the production starts, we will securitize our share of the production.
And you are saying there's no guarantee production will start?
On time. On top of that, it's also very likely, as we've seen with some discoveries on this part of the world, that you have technical issues. So the actual production, the amount of oil actually produced, look at the Jubilee one, for instance. We are supposed to be doing 250,000 barrels per day now and the rest. Now we are trying to do 80,000, things like that. If your volumes are really low, even if you securitize those volumes, you are not able to service the debt. The government has to service the debt because government is still there.
So Parliament has a role to play, but the government executive itself should either give a proper explanation. But Cabinet has approved this. So it's as clear as the government is for it.
Yes, which is also a whole range of things, because we've seen documents that went to EMT and Cabinet, which were then different from, some of the numbers had changed by the time the documents got to Parliament. But the fact of the matter is that now that they have the power, the mandate to go and start soliciting for deals. If they bring a deal that's $1.1 billion, CSOs are going to continue mounting our advocacy against it. If they bring a deal that is far lower, we are their friends.
Okay. So the GMPC should negotiate tougher
Exactly.
with Aker and
And
get us a
as
better
far as
deal.
Nancom is concerned, our thinking is that they need to postpone backing in until the appraisal is successful.
Well, the deal tied the two, so I don't know how they're going to extricate that. But thank you. His article is on citynewsroom.com, and it's titled "How GMPC Made Norway $1 billion Richer." It's a nice read. It's only 9 pages. You enjoy it. Thank you, Bryce Simmons.
Thank you very
much. He's the Vice President of Imani, one of the CSOs, who say GMPC's plan to acquire significant stakes in 2 key oil blocks is not well thought through, and it's a rip-off. There's more on this coming up. Coming up next, though, is the business dashboard. Stay with City TV. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
The Point of View is brought to you by Cowbell Coffee. Cowbell Coffee. Taste it, love it. Kel White Charcoal. Happy smile.